80% of the properties needed to be rented, that 70% of them should be 1 and 2 bedrooms, that all rentals and affordables should be to islanders only, working through the tiers of the housing list and then extending to the local area and not extending to mainland residents. That's one question. The second question I have is regarding the modelling that was done a very long time ago for the infrastructure in terms of traffic. Now, clearly, the traffic infrastructure, I'm guessing here, of 2013 or so, is quite different from the traffic infrastructure of today. I hope it is anyway, otherwise we're going in the wrong direction. We certainly want to encourage more walking and cycling. So I wondered, for how long is that traffic modelling, ancient now, traffic modelling actually valid? The third one is, how can we ensure maximum solar gain on all the developments on the site? And the fourth part is, what is the ratio in terms of the average number of EV charge points per dwelling?
Mr. Wilkinson, would you like to deal with those points?
Thank you, Chairman. I do think I've already answered the first one, but I will just clarify in terms of not only was the percentage of units set by the legal agreement that was signed as part of the outline application and supports the application already, there was a local connection criteria requirement, so that is incorporated into the agreement. It does require, it's generally what I would call our standard text, so it requires that a person is connected to Ryde, both or the person that lives in Ryde, and then a person who has for 5 years prior to the acquisition or occupation as continuous or full-time paid employment in Ryde, a person at the date has lived in an adjoining parish, the same working requirement for an adjoining parish, then working to the Isle of Wight, then working to a person on Home Finder. So those standard local connection is incorporated within the legal agreement. So again, much like the split of rented and affordable, that is already determined as part of the outline application and forms part of the legal agreement.
Councillor Jarman, can you use your microphone, please?
So just to clarify, we did not specify the percentage of rented properties on the site or the percentage of 1 and 2 bedroom properties on the site.
So we did not specify the number of 1 and 2 bedrooms that had to be on the development site. We did specify the percentage of rented. I'm desperately trying to find the definition of affordable housing. So we required that out of the 35% affordable housing, there was a mix of 24% of that total number being affordable rent or social rent, and 11% being intermediate dwellings or discount market sale. So we stipulated it as part of that. In terms of the number of bedrooms, I'm not sure whether the question relates purely to the affordable housing or to all the units. I would say in relation to the affordable housing, although I appreciate that's not where the question's coming from, but one of the things that councillors will note that the report covers is the fact that the scheme stipulates the affordable housing that would be provided in terms of the unit types for phase 1, but doesn't for the later phases. They will provide 35% affordable housing. It will be in the required mix of 24 and 11% of the split. But because we are ultimately at the time in which phase 2 comes forward, there may be a different need in the community in terms of who's on the register and what that need is. It may be that we desperately need more 1 bedrooms at that time. It may be that we desperately need more 4 bedrooms at that time. So each unit has been designed to be compliant with the requirements of an affordable housing provider. So at the time in which that phase comes forward, the units that can be selected as affordable housing can respect the needs that are identified at that point, or that the affordable housing provider requires to meet their identified need at that time. In terms of the split of dwellings, and this may cover a point raised earlier, there is a split in terms of unit types. The layout currently sees 13% 1-bedroom units, 38% 2-bedroom units, 35% 3-bedroom units, and 14% 4-bedroom units. So at the moment, there is the greatest number of units of the 2-bedroom, because that is where the greatest need is identified within the, actually, in terms of the suggested mix, there's 30, in terms of the housing needs assessment, it falls kind of in line with what we're looking at as part of that assessment. Effectively, the assessment says in terms of market housing, appreciate we're talking about all housing, but 5% for 1 bedroom, 35% 2 bedroom, 40% 3 bedroom, and 20% 4 bedroom. So what the application actually does is provide a greater number of 1 and 2 bedrooms and 3 and 4 bedrooms than it is stipulated within that market need of the of the housing needs assessment. In terms of modelling and infrastructure and how up to date it is, ultimately the information that is submitted as part of the original outline application remains relevant because that is the application that has consent. So for any application, for example, if I do a non-specific in relation to this application, if we grant consent for something, it has 3 years to commence. Ultimately, it can then be built at any point once it's commenced. The consent stands, however long that commencement takes. The same falls for this. The outline consent stands, the legal agreement consent stands. So that modelling information is the modelling information that must be considered as part of the application. In relation to changes to that network, in relation to other applications that are being dealt with, ultimately, any application that's approved subsequently to an application where modelling has been considered has to consider the likely generation of traffic from that approved development. So it's always a moving feast for what comes subsequently because they consider with or without other development as a cumulative impact. But the data modelling that's undertaken at the time, the application, the outline is set, and therefore the modelling remains relevant to that outline because that is what's got consent. In terms of your other 2 points, in terms of maximum solar gain and the ratio of EV charging points, the application does not currently incorporate details of those factors. It may be something in terms of the EV charging points councillors wish to incorporate as part of the condition. However, I would state that ultimately the requirement for those nature of features is set out within building regulations now. Building regulations have been updated to incorporate those requirements. So it is not something that planning looked to cover. It is an adaptation that we've looked at as part of the IPS, as part of the suggested policies as part of the IPS. We don't currently have a policy that requires EV charging points or the use of solar panels. We work on the basis that the units would meet building control standards because any set provision may actually be overtaken by building control standards. Building control standards are constantly evolving, and therefore they are what the application would seek to achieve, opposed to anything set out in a planning consent. And much like the concerns over the highway data, at the point in which the condition is set, the levels may exceed those limited by the condition, and therefore we use the ever-evolving building regulations, which then require those provisions to be brought forward as part of the designs of the units. I hope that answers the questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Are you happy, Chris, or are you more questions?
So to your third point on the max, so we could define maximum solar gain, given that the maximum would never be exceeded by statute. Maximum is a maximum, whereas the statute would require a minimum threshold. We could define a maximal threshold being the totality.
To the Chairman, I would have concerns over incorporating anything that required maximum solar gain when the units don't currently incorporate solar panels, because it would be how we would define achieving the maximum solar gain and then incorporating that retrofitted feature onto all of the units if that's how we were seeking to do it. You could also argue that maximum solar gain incorporated utilising areas of the open space for solar panels and anything like that. So it's an undefined element, and ultimately the design of the units would have to meet the required building regulation standards for the eco ratings, for want of a better term.
Although we did exactly that on the reservoir development.
Reservoir development was slightly different, if I may come back, in that it was a block of flats or a number of block of flats, and therefore it was a significantly smaller development, and it was a more controllable space. It had a roof area, so we could require that the roof was used for maximum solar gain. It's very different when you're looking at 904 units and the amount of commercial floor space we're talking about, because you would have to look at, if you were saying maximum solar gain, effectively you may be saying that every single unit had to incorporate solar panels. And that would be significantly over and above the requirement of anything that would be considered reasonable by officers. So we would advise against it, but it's obviously in the gift of members.
Thank you. Councillor Churchman.
Sorry, got a question on water. We talk about Monkton Brook on page 53, but Sarah, you mentioned Southern Water. Now, if I see Monkton Brook on every ruddy planning application that's connected with Ryde, folks, it's a small, it floods, for goodness sake. So where is the water going? Because the runoff on that size of area of building is going to be colossal.
Wilkinson.
Thanks, Chairman. There's two elements that we're looking at in terms of Southern Water deals with the foul, and they're dealing with that. That's a separate matter. That's a separate entity. Anything in terms of the runoff is the surface water. And that is linked to, that's not where I wanted to be. We can go to that one. Is linked to the surface water from the site. So with any new development, you have to calculate the greenfield runoff rate of the site. So you have to establish at what rate the water is currently running into the brook. You then take that figure and you add 40+% in order to ensure that you're allowing for climate change. So you're allowing for the additional likely rainfall. You then have to provide capacity for that water to be attenuated so that it flows into the stream at a 40% betterment to the current greenfield runoff rate. So you will see the 4 pools at the base of the site, which is at the lower section of the site. They are attenuation ponds. So we have calculated the capacity of those ponds against the greenfield runoff rate plus the freeboard and the requirement for climate change, and have established that they can hold the sufficient levels of rainwater to ensure that they then work through what we call a hydro break. So you then have each of them has a separate flow point into the brook, and that is the speed of that is controlled by a hydro break to ensure that it is not exceeding that level of outfall, so that it controls the rate of flow so it doesn't result in additional flooding. It can also, at the point of an event, if necessary, be cut off if there's sufficient capacity to hold it in the ponds. So that actually, in a flash flood event, it could stop water flowing into that brook in order to ensure that you're not resulting in flooding. What you've also got as part of the application is you'll see those buildings are set back from the stream. There is a buffer zone in order that if there is an issue and the stream does overflow, it is into open space. It is not impacting on any properties. It is utilising that area alongside the river to allow for that to occur. We're also, as part of the scheme, incorporating significant improvements to the river channel itself. There is a Monkton Mead strategy as part of the application that looks at such things as the removal of the Japanese knotweed and things like that. The application, well, the applicant would also require what we call ordinary watercourse consent, which the local planning authority determine. So in order to put the outfalls into the brook and to incorporate the hydro breaks and all the walls and everything that's required to make that drainage scheme possible, they require ordinary watercourse consent, which they have is a separate permission they have to apply for. As part of that ordinary watercourse consent, we can require them to undertake, and I've talked about it in the report, I've talked about it in the update paper. Effectively, my understanding is that much the problem with Monkton Mead at the moment is there is a large amount of detritus in there, I believe. The standard shopping trolleys, traffic cones, all sorts, causing blockages and issues. It is the riparian responsibility of the landowner to keep that clean, that we can make that part of the requirement of the ordinary watercourse consent, that detritus is removed, and actually it is kept clean as part of the management strategy to ensure that there is a long-term maintenance of that channel so it doesn't get blocked by detritus and elements that shouldn't be there, while also working to ensure that we can increase the ecological value of it through the management strategy and landscaping strategy.
Councillor Churchman. Yep.
Obviously, we're talking about the railway line at the bottom. Have South Western Railway been approached or passed a comment, because after all, if the water does get out of hand, we won't have a railway line. It will just collect and possibly blow electrics apart from anything else.
Mr Wilkinson?
Thanks, Chairman. We haven't had discussions with the railway in terms of the kind of the proposal, because ultimately the proposal looks at a betterment to the existing situation. So the existing situation, the water flows at a Greenfield runoff rate. The application would hold that water, control its flow, and actually improve that runoff rate by 40+% in order to allow for those changing circumstances. So it's not a discussion we've had with the third party, because the development's been designed to, for want of a better term, we use it a lot, wash its own face in terms of that drainage to ensure that it doesn't cause flooding.
Thank you. Councillor Lilly?
Coming back into the debate about Southern Water, because I recently had a meeting with them in Ryde, and it's quite interesting what they said, which was very different from what has been said tonight. I want to know that in relation to the NPPF 2021, right, is that relevant to this application tonight? And also, is the Environmental Act 2021 relevant to this application tonight? I'll come back. I've got a number of other questions, but I'd like an answer to those first.
One second, while I think they're just working out who's going to answer that one. So we have to do a bit of research on that one, Councillor Lilly.
In answer to the question, I think in terms of the NPPF 21, ultimately the outline stands, so we can't review the outline consent. Yes, the updates to the NPPF are relevant to the consideration of the matters that are relevant for consideration, if that makes sense. In terms of the Environment Act, that's an act. It sits outside of the planning process, and therefore it stands. But the application should be considered in accordance with the policies that form part of the local plan, effectively, as the kind of material consideration. So yes, they do, and it should, but we have to be cautious based on the outline consent in terms of the weight we give those elements of consideration.
Thank you,
Can I come
Councillor Lilly.
back on that particular question? Therefore, the things like, for instance, in the Environmental Act, where there's meant to be a net gain of 10% biodiversity when is done, does that apply? And also with the NPPF about low carbon and the relation to climate change?
Ms Wilkinson.
Thanks, Chairman. In terms of biodiversity net gain, the Environment Act has set that back in terms of implementation in policy. So it is a stated desire, but it's not set in policy. There is an intention for it to come through and for there to be a requirement for a 10% net gain, but it's November. It is not set out in current planning policy. It's a legislative aim of kind of adaptations of policies. In terms of environmental features, it is a material consideration in terms of the provisions of the site and the weight that you decide to give to that factor in terms of the provision of the site. Officers are advising you that the units will be designed to building control standards. The building control sets out the requirements to achieve that level of environmental rating. And that is where officers consider the acceptable level to be, and in compliance with building control, it would meet those requirements of the NPPF.
Okay, thank you. From that, I wish to go on to a bit confused about the 900 sort of gas-fired, i.e. this gas-fired facility to the 900 homes. It seemed one of the comments from Mr Hepburn was that none of the houses would have gas boilers, right? But we have got this gas-fired facility, so can that be clarified exactly what is heating these houses?
The CHP plant, which would be gas-fired, would heat the water within those properties. It would not provide the heating, it would effectively provide the hot water for those properties. It is provided as a stipulation of the core strategy. So the core strategy requires that any developments over a certain number have a combined CHP plant effectively, and that is why that forms part of the application. It is a requirement in the legal agreement that it is provided as part of the scheme, because at the time in which it was submitted, that was a provision. Obviously, it is an element of the current scheme. If and when gas becomes removed from properties, as Mr Hepburn says, this isn't currently part. These wouldn't be within properties. This would be a central provision. But it may be that needs to be adapted at that time and looked at that time. But currently, policy does stipulate that a combined heat and power plant should be provided, and that is what the application is proposing. And it is what is set out in the legal agreement must be delivered.
Has there been any, sorry, well, the reality is the world's changed, hasn't it? And the fact of gas prices and that gone up considerably. So is this now an economical kind of plant, you know, because we didn't have the Ukrainian war, we didn't have the all the things that we've actually now on regarding energy, and obviously all our legislation is now moving towards renewable energy away from fossil fuel. So are we sort of, is this future proofing within that?
In light of the changing circumstances, the developer may choose to come back and ask for that element to be removed as part of the scheme. It is currently a provision of the legal agreement that they provide it. Therefore, we have, by utilising previous technologies, we have required them to incorporate it. This is why my advice in answer to an earlier question is we don't stipulate that they utilise solar panels. In the event that actually in 5, 6, 7 years' time, we determine solar panels aren't the best method of providing renewable energy, and another feature comes in. This is why we generally are advising now that we utilise building regulations to set those standards and to provide that provision, because it's ever changing in a much quicker way than planning does. But so the legal agreement requires that a CHP plant is provided as part of the scheme. The current policies require combined heat and power as part of developments of this scale. Therefore, it isn't something we've incorporated into the IPS. It isn't something that future policies would be stipulating was a requirement, but this application has to be considered in conjunction with the current policies and in light of the outline consent and what the legal agreement requires them to provide at this time.
Councillor Lilly.
Does this committee therefore have a power to put a stipulation that we actually view, particularly with current legislation, as you've actually outlined, say that this is not acceptable and that actually it should change?
Through the chairman, I would advise, I can't say you can't, but I would advise strongly against suggesting a refusal on the ground that it incorporates a CHP plant that the 106 of the outline requires is provided.
If I may, Chair, just to pick up on that,
Also,
excuse me, pick up on that point as well. I think to echo what Ms Wilkinson has said is that we can't sit here and say that you can't do that. But I think just to add more information to aid your deliberation on that point is that as it stands at the moment, for example, the use of gas-fired central heating, whether we agree with it in the room or not, is a legitimate approach under law at this moment in time. it will be phased out moving forward from 2025, and therefore we will see a decrease. But at this moment in time, that is a legitimate approach. Now, I think the extra information I would just add to that members may wish to think about is if you are then pushing for something beyond what is set out nationally, we need to have a very clear, I would advocate, policy basis and framework for doing so. Now, unfortunately, and it comes back to me talking about our tools in our toolbox, so I do apologise for that, but under the current toolbox of the core strategy, we don't have the tools to do that. We do have different tools in the IPS, but as members will be aware, they are tools that we can't access at the moment, and we push to bring forward, linked to other council policies and strategies as referred to earlier in the meeting, such as the Mission Zero point, to actually seek to legitimise, to bring forward in advance some of these national measures. But at this moment in time, we would advise that it would be very difficult for us to robustly justify refusal on that ground. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Councillor Spink, did you indicate you wanted to speak? And then I'll ask Councillor Jarman. Is that okay? And then Councillor Lilly again. Councillor Spink, you want to make a question or a point?
I thought I was giving.
Lily? Oh, okay, I'll allow that, and Councillor Speaker's allowing you to carry on. Okay.
This planning committee, even though it's a completely different thing, but it was a decision regarding climate change, and which was actually to do with the drilling of oil and Araton. We actually made a decision because it was actually in the legislation, in the plan and in the rules that we were recommended by officers at that time, that we couldn't say no to it, right? i.e. it would go to appeal. We 100% took the view that actually we couldn't allow that to happen because of climate change and the climate change strategies, right? So that was a fossil fuel, and we made a 100%, I think it was a unanimous decision, this committee, to actually go against the officer's recommendation on the fact that legislation was travelling, right, in the direction of climate change, and actually we should take that on. And we did. And actually the applicants actually did not go to appeal, right, within that. I can't see why, if we, regarding the use of fossil fuel, actually make that same kind of bravery decision that we actually did in regard to oil drilling.
If I may come back, thank you. Just in guidance more than anything else for other councillors in the room, considering that option. You are correct, Councillor Lee, it is an entirely different situation. In that was an application for drilling. This isn't an application in front of you for a CHP plant. This is an application in front of you for a significant housing and commercial development that incorporates a combined heat and power plant because the policies require it to. It also has consent. So if this was the outline stage and they were incorporating a gas-powered heat plant unit and you wish that to be excluded, despite the fact the policy, we'd be having a very different discussion. But it is part of the outline, it is part of the description of the outline. I believe I will double check that. So I would, yes, Community Energy Centre. So I would give great caution to comparing the two schemes, as one seeked consent for the feature in itself, it was drilling, whereas this seeks consent for housing development that provides that facility because that is a requirement of the policies within the plan for it to do so. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And I'd ask Councillor Spink to ask or make a point.
Thank you very much. Now I have two or three questions, please. And I apologise if it's already been dealt with, but we've been moving at quite a pace, if I may say so, and I may have missed it. But one of the points raised by members of the public who addressed us was that some of the roadway, if I've understood it correctly, improvements, and in particular at Westridge Cross, couldn't take place or may not be able to take place because the land is in third-party ownership. What is the position there? Is it still in third-party ownership, or is it land now that is under the control of the developer?
Wilkinson?
I can confirm that land is under control of the developer.
The next question that I'd ask is on the affordable element that Councillor Jarman raised. With regard to affordable, can the tiering system of first it goes to people in Ryde, thereafter perhaps people on the island, can we say that, because sometimes, if I've understood it correctly, there is from time to time after the island, it can go off the island. Now, can we put a condition that the affordable element cannot go off the island, so that we shouldn't be building affordable housing when we've got 2,000 people on the register? Why would we be building affordable housing that can go to mainlanders? Can we make a condition, therefore, that the affordable housing can only go by way of sale or rent to islanders?
Interesting question.
I would say if we were having a discussion about the outline application in this room, then we could incorporate it if members wished us to. We are not. The outline application has been granted and the legal agreement has set out the definition of the local connection criteria, and therefore it is already set within the legal agreement that forms part of that outline consent.
Well, our hands are tied on that, unfortunately. With regard to crime, and I know in part you've said that I'm concerned by some of the boundary treatments. Some of the boundary treatments are to be a minimum of virtually 2 meters high. And in relation to the boundary treatments of the commercial element, that also applies. Plus, there's going to be considerable lighting. I'm a little concerned that this might become something of an unpleasant housing estate with 2 meter high boundary treatments and lighting in what is still fundamentally, even with this development, one could say, a rural area, although it's rapidly becoming an urban area. But can we specify that we want considerable thought to be given and conditions in respect of the boundary treatments?
Wilkinson?
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of that matter, I entirely agree with you. We have significant concerns over some of those comments in terms of the height of fencing and the urbanising nature of such fencing, when actually clever landscaping and planting can achieve the same. You know, if you put spiky trees in, spiky hedgerow in, you actually stop access probably far better than putting in a fence. And then hence why officers have balanced the comments of the Crime Prevention Design Advisor. Much of that is already covered in the conditions of the outline, which deal with the boundary treatments, which officers have looked at as part of the application. That's part of the landscaping information. I briefly showed that very busy slide that showed the different things. As part of that, we have looked at the ways in which landscaping would be provided. We've looked at the ways in which boundary treatments would be provided to make sure that it's not over dominating the area and over urbanising it. In terms of lighting, that is massive, that is significantly controlled by the development, because we also have concerns over excessive lighting around the landscape buffers, around those areas where actually lighting should be kept to a minimum. And therefore there is a mix of lighting strategy on site. There is conditions requiring that we deal with and control that lighting, especially in terms of the more urban buffers where you are close to the habitats, in order to ensure that we don't get a situation where we do have excessive lighting, and there is a balance between actually ensuring an area is safe, but ensuring an area retains its rural character, much like the kind of areas in the boundaries of the site.
Finally, following on to some extent anyway from Councillor Churchman's, I almost said Councillor Vanessa, and that would be a breach of protocol, I think. So Councillor Churchman's comments about water, in particular foul water. I know that there is this agreement, as I understand it, with Natural England that provided sewage connects to Sandown, it's considered nitrate neutral as far as the Solent is concerned. Now, Natural England presumably are aware of that, but at paragraph 7.92 of your report, you say the summary of, sorry, I'll let you get there. The summary of Natural England's comments outlined that further information is required to determine impacts on designated sites, specifically the need for an HRA, Habitats Regulations Assessment, in respect of wastewater impacts on the Solent sites. However, as outlined above, this impact can be scoped out in line with the Council's nitrates position statement, and therefore the original HRA is still relevant. My concern is Natural England talking about something else there? Because they presumably know what they've agreed to. My concern is that what often happens is it's deemed to be nitrate neutral, but in the current increase in storm discharges, this development will storm discharge, will it not, to the Solent?
I can't confirm where the storm discharge goes in terms of the development. What I can confirm is that what we have from Natural England is a comment where they have confirmed that in instances where we have an agreed position statement in regards to nitrates with Natural England, that states that in instances where the discharge goes to Sandown, the matter can be scoped out. So in Natural England's comments, where they say that we need to consider it as part of the Habitat Regulation Assessment, at the point of that comment, they don't know where that discharge goes. They're effectively saying you need to consider this in line with the potential impacts. We've considered it, we've determined it goes to Sandown, and therefore we have scoped it out in line with our position statement, which has been agreed with Natural England. So it's about a staged process effectively. So they're commenting, saying you need to consider nitrates. We have considered it, we have scoped it out because of where it discharges to. And that is in line with the nitrate position statement and in line with the kind of advice we've had from Natural England in relation to generic, considering this matter in a generic way. Actually.
Okay, I've got two more people. So first of all is Councillor Jarman, then Councillor Cox, then Councillor Lilly.
So just continuing on the theme a little bit from what Councillor Spink, I attended the Southern Water event recently at the Riverside Centre and spoke at length with them about stormwater overflows. I think they were quite happy when I left at the end of the day. They do have some targets to somewhat reduce stormwater overflow discharges, but it is very clear from their map, and indeed for any of us who watch Beach Boy or any of the other monitoring apps, you'll know that everything that is a stormwater overflow in Ryde is going to go into the Solent. So anything that adds to the current stormwater overflow burden is inevitably going to discharge nitrates into the Solent. No matter where the foul water might normally go to, in such an event, it will discharge into the Solent, and that is a given. Now, their plans to mitigate against that are very slight and very long term. So anything that we approve, we have to be aware and accept it will increase nitrate discharges into the Solent. It's an inevitability given their network and the infrastructure and their intense reliance, as all of us who monitor these things and have lovely beaches that we will wish for others so, we know that those stormwater overflows pour into our seas around our island very frequently. We see it all the time. It's deplorable. So I think we need to be very mindful of that, even though there might be an undertaking of that connectivity to Sandown. The reality is that the stormwater overflows will be activated, it will discharge through RIDE into the Solent, and it will increase nitrates. I have a question about the answer that was given to Councillor Lilly. You talked about the combined heating and power issue, but you referred specifically to hot water, for hot water to those premises, rather than heating to those premises. So the intention is that the hot water to those premises provides hot water for use in them, but also hot water for the central heating. Is that correct? And so given that it's hot water for heating and hot water per se, the fuel which is used for that is gas and more gas. That's correct. Okay, I just wanted to make sure we all understood when we heard that there are no gas boilers. There are gas boilers, they're whopping great big ones, and they're in the CHP. Is that correct? Or am I getting something terribly wrong here?
No,
That these
no.
are magical gas boilers that are not gas boilers.
No, ultimately, the gas boilers would be the central boiler. There would be, I think the comment in the public speaking was that would not be gas boilers in the individual properties, I believe was what was said. So the individual properties would not have gas boilers in them. The CHP plant would be gas fired, and it would provide hot water to the properties. All the things that are then used, that hot water is then utilised for, including the heating system.
Okay, so that answers the next point. So it's gas, and more gas. Are those CHPs modifiable from the outset so that if they start on gas, they can readily be transferred to an alternate fuel, i.e. are they combination fuel boilers or are they only gas boilers?
At the moment, my understanding is that it would be only gas boilers, but ultimately we're approving the building to accommodate the central heating system for the gas boilers. Obviously, if the developer found that actually because gas is being phased out, they didn't wish to pursue that as a thing, they have a building that can be utilised for an alternative method potentially, and they can come to us and they can seek an alteration to the consent to use a different fuel source. But at the moment, the outline consent details the CHP plant for the gas boilers.
Okay, understood. So the next one is also a clarification to one back to Councillor Spink's question, where we talked about the land being in the hands of the developers, and the reference here, I think, from a couple of them were specifically to a junction. Can you confirm that all the land required for this development is now in the hands of the developers, including all the land required for road mitigation measures? And if not, whose hands is it in?
If I may, through the chairman, it's not relevant to a planning consideration because we don't deal with land ownership, but I am getting nods from the agent to confirm that yes, all the land is within the control of the developer.
It is relevant to deliverability though. Okay, last one is, we had a few questions earlier about, I think it was from Councillor Drew in his address, and I picked up on a couple of mentions of it where the question about, and I think probably from the local town and parish members as well, about who is actually behind the scheme. And there seems to be some doubt about that. That obviously has an impact in terms of sustainable development, and where we're looking for undertakings to be given by legal authorities, we want to make sure that those legal entities have the wherewithal to be able to continue with that and to deliver it at the end of the day. So can you confirm who are the legal entities behind the scheme, and that you've done the due diligence to assure that they have the fiscal status to be able to deliver long term on the commitments in this agreement?
This may be a matter that I have to turn to our legal advisor on, because from our perspective, there is no requirement in planning. It is tied to the landowner. So the legal agreement is signed by the landowner, and the landowner signs and states that they will commit to undertaking that. And that is as far as planning considerations go in relation to the development. They are a link to the development, so the development in itself funds those works. And the works are required for the development. And planning goes no further in terms of assessing the financial backing of those applicants or those signatories. That goes far above and beyond what planning can control.
We have seen
Um,
this before, though, in terms of bond discussions, I remember in the past, which you didn't favour at all.
Nope.
And we're all aware that landowner companies and the registration process for that can be somewhat fickle at times. And we've seen that being played out, for example, in tower blocks with cladding issues, where the actual owner of those buildings has somehow evaporated at the end of the day, and the legal responsibility and the financial responsibility associated with that hasn't been fulfilled. So the question really here is a broader one then to Mr. Guard is, what measures are in place to assure the fiscal long-term stability and ability to deliver on the commitments in this agreement?
It's Mr. Guard.
Thank you, Chairman. As you would expect, Councillor John, we do undertake some level of due diligence at the point that we complete the Section 106 agreement. I can talk from experience because I did it on this particular Section 106 agreement many years ago. That ensures that we have the right companies who are able to act and the right people binding those companies, to ensure that the Section 106 agreement, any planning obligation, is secured against the title of the land. They do bind successors in title, as you've heard. And then that brings us on to how would the council react? How does it ensure, your point, how does it ensure that these things are secured? And the enforcement method of a planning obligation, a Section 106 agreement, is by injunction at the court. And so the council, if it were concerned that, and I think I don't have the Section 106 agreement in front of me. Earlier on, I think we heard that the highways works had to be completed before the occupation of the 240th unit, say, for example. If the developer attempted to occupy more than 240 units before they had completed those works, or indeed any obligation in the 106 agreement, the council would find itself at court seeking an injunction preventing the occupation of more than 240 units until the obligation in the agreement had been secured. And that applies to all of the obligations, and they bind all of the land titles. And when we negotiated the original Section 106 agreement on this site, there was a significant number of landowners because of the size of the development. Any person who has since purchased the land from a landowner will be bound by the terms of that Section 106 agreement.
So the homeowners on that site would be bound by that agreement if the original developer did not fulfill it.
That's quite right. So what would happen is that any successor in title would be bound by the terms of the agreement. But what would happen is, in practice, you would expect a conveyancer to ensure that all of the obligations have been complied with in order for the person to purchase the houses. And so in practice, what would happen is, through the conveyancing process, no person would be advised to purchase a property without the assurance that the obligations have been complied with.
Thank you, Mr. Guard. Just want to point out we have 10 minutes to make a decision or to not be able to make a decision this evening. So, and I have two people on my list already, which is Councillor Cox, Councillor Lilly. Councillor want to speak again. But we've had so far no proposal to accept or reject. But this is one for you, committee. We've got to come to a conclusion as whether we want to make a decision this evening, or whether Councillor Drew was right and this was too complicated and we have to defer to the next meeting. So, well, I was going to.
Can I just try and help?
Okay.
I think it's been a long meeting, and if we don't make a decision today, I would be concerned if we had to leave it 6 weeks again, particularly when we've got other applications presumably banking up, etc. I would suggest that if we don't make it tonight, that you should arrange for a meeting within a fortnight's time to reconsider, and that you adjourn to. I could sit and ask you 20 questions tonight. You know, it's been dominated by certain people so far who have been asking questions largely about issues over which we have no control, i.e. the outline permission and the legal agreements. I have questions about things regarding the reserved matters that we're supposed to be here for, but I haven't had a chance to ask them. So I don't want to leave that for 6 weeks, because like a lot of people here, my memory is not as good as it used to be. You know, so I would like the floor to continue as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Good point. Councillor Cox, you wanted to make a point?
I only wanted to get clarification about the amount of money going to the education. because it wasn't the number that I remember being quoted when we were on site.
Yes, through the chairman. Thank you, Councillor Cox. You are correct in that on site I said 3 million, which has been re-clarified in terms of the figure. It isn't as much as 3 million, so my apologies for that. That was I believe it's in the region of, I think I may have said, because it was from memory on site. So my apologies. I do have the agreement in front of me and I can confirm that the figure is, sorry, bear with me. I can't do a find on it because of the nature and the way it's been uploaded. So bear with me one moment. Yeah, that's what a speaker said. So I just want to double check and give you the correct figure. I don't want to mislead. So please bear with me. Fine, I'll get there. It's
So,
split.
Mr. Bolton, you fill us in on the situation. Oh, sorry, it's Mr. Guard. Can you just tell us
Just
where we
making-
are with the technical situation?
Thank you, Chairman. Just making good use of the time while we're here waiting for the agreement to be funded. To remind members that the mechanics of what happens at 8 o'clock is that concludes the business for the day. 8 o'clock is, I've heard it referred to as the guillotine. That is the point at which the meeting concludes, and all remaining item of business move to the next committee. On that point, I think Mr. Bolter is going to speak.
Thank you. So just listening to the conversation, conscious of time, I'm wondering if something along the following lines might be agreeable to the committee. That should a decision not be reached this evening, officers will go away and look at the council's corporate diary to find the next available opportunity for the reconvening of this committee to finish hearing this item in advance of the next scheduled planning committee meeting, which on a minor point is actually, as a quirk of fate, scheduled for 5 weeks' time rather than 6. But I think if there is the will of the floor for that, that at least gives us something to go away and to work with to try and get a meeting into the diary, and to, of course, give us enough time to be able to serve papers in a timely manner, etc.
Have you found your figure?
Yeah, sorry,
Okay.
apologies. It was under primary education contribution rather than education contribution. So my apologies. It is £2,327,800. And in answer to another question that actually in relation to that contribution came up at site visits, I think the question was about whether it would be ring fence to ride. That came up in the discussion, and certainly the definition of the contribution within its payment restrictions is that it's that we would not cause off occupation of any of the units until it provides a, apologies, the council's provision is that it would pay it solely for the ride area. So it would be to increase capacity for the ride area.
I see that Councillor Andre wants to say something on this, given her role as a cabinet member.
Not necessarily my role as a cabinet member, but can the chair just confirm that if this is moved to what in effect is an extraordinary meeting, that it will be the only item on the agenda for that meeting? Thank you.
I can assure you of that. It was Councillor Lilly next on my list.
I'm just conscious that I have got other questions, but I'm conscious that I'll give space for the remainder of the time.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. Councillor Churchman.
Both Councillor Lilly and myself are substituting, but I assume that if we have an extra meeting, that we will stay in situ. Not physically for 2 weeks, but
That depends on the members themselves, doesn't it?
all I'm saying is, having sat through all this, I think I'd be quite cross if I didn't get my vote.
Tell that to Matt.
Sorry.
Tell that to
Sorry, councillor Quirk.
I move the resolution as put by Ollie.
Okay, we have a proposal to accept the application.
I think we're moving to.
Oh. Sorry, I misunderstood completely.
I think.
I move the resolution as proposed by Oliver Bolton.
Okay, in terms of the next meeting. Yep, that sounds like an excellent idea. So we've got a seconder, so we got, also you want to comment on that?
Thank you. And also to just pick up on councillor Churchman's question, what we'll look at doing is trying to pull together all that kind of information around those processes to try and then give some advice and help everyone with that.
Just to confirm what Bengard said, so only people, and I'm sure you're right, only people who've sat on this matter so far this evening can attend that continuance of the matter. We can't have further substitution.
Guard.
Is that right? So you can have people.
Mr. Guard, please, sorry.
Chairman, I'm really conscious that in a minute I'm just going to stop speaking, but Tim is it. So we can do the meeting will automatically adjourn if we reach that point. Absolutely. No, I've not made that comment. What Ollie Bolter has confirmed is that we'll go away and we'll confirm the logistics for the next meeting.
Okay, can we say all those in favour of the resolution to change, to find a new date? I think I will on that occasion, yeah. Sorry, thank you all very much. That brings the meeting to a close. Remember the microphone.